Hey guys, welcome to another one of my YouTube live streams. This time we are live streaming directly from the 9th floor of Mass General Hospital, where I've been a patient for the last few days after complications from a simple bladder procedure. However, the show must go on. Yes, my hair is a complete mess. I had an EEG done yesterday because I've been having some breakthrough seizures due to severe pain, and they wanted to make sure I wasn't still having residual seizure activity. So I had glue all over my head, and it made a big mess. Anyway, we last left Cassie with every last little bit of hope drained from her small little body when she finally reached out for help from the adults in her life. Her therapist accused her of manufacturing symptoms to avoid working on the real issues. This chapter begins after Cassie's suicidal overdose on her grandparents' medicine cabinet. Her mom went home to grab her license and Cassie's insurance card, leaving Cassie at her grandparents' house with her grandma, who, after Cassie passed out on the kitchen floor, told Cassie that if her mom wasn't back in 5 minutes, that she was calling an ambulance. Cassie was secretly hoping that she'd get to the hospital too late and die on the gurney while her mom was out of the room. We will begin reading here. 5 minutes passed, and holding on to consciousness was a struggle. I had to keep forcing myself to blink and clench my fists every once in a while. I was feeling foggy and far away. My vision was blurring over a lot. I still couldn't stand or sit up. Grandma was hovering over me. It's been 5 minutes, she told me. My sluggish heart froze in my chest. Just 5 more minutes, please, I begged in my slurred over and fogged up voice. Talking was such a chore. It was near impossible to force the words out. Grandma hesitated and looked like she was going to say no. But just then, my mom burst through the door. Hi, Jerry. I'm back, my mom announced. She looked down at my small body sprawled out on the wooden floor. Come on, she told me, as if she expected me to spring up off the floor and skip out to the car with her. I wearily looked up at her. Cassie, we don't have time for this. Stand up and walk out to the car with me, my mom half snapped. She didn't seem to realize how sick I was from all the pills I'd taken. Looking back, I think she might have been trying to protect herself from the truth that I was very close to dying, and that she had not been able to protect me from myself. I once again tried to force myself to get up to a standing position. Once again, I felt the weight of the room pinning me down. All right, I'll help you get up. My mom sighed, as if helping me was a chore she didn't want to accept. My mom grabbed me under the arms and hoisted me up to my feet. I leaned on her heavily as I stumbled through the door and out into the car. Once we were in the car, I let my head loll back against the seat and let my eyelids hang half-mast. The road rushed by out the window. I felt like I was hanging, suspended in a vat of thick fluid. Soon my eyes were drifting shut all the way. Soon, I felt like I was hanging in solid darkness. I was no longer aware of the car, or the road rushing by, or my mom, who was starting to think that maybe this wasn't like the other overdoses. I wasn't aware of any of that. I was just aware of a sensation of falling through a bumpy darkness. Had I finally fallen through the rabbit hole? The next thing I was aware of was my mom's anxious voice. I can't get her to wake up. I need to get her into the ER. She took some of her grandparents' pills. I wanted to open my eyes so I could show my mom that I was awake again, but my eyes refused to open. They wouldn't listen. I felt arms scooping me up out of the car and depositing me onto a cool sheet that smelled of antiseptic and medication. Everything went black and silent again. My awareness returned to me as I could feel my body moving rapidly down the hall on a stretcher. I could hear running footsteps alongside me. Then I felt my shirt being lifted off my limp body. I had a moment of panic and embarrassment as I felt the cold medicinal air of the hospital hit my bare and exposed chest. Then I was plunged back into bumpy darkness. An unknown amount of time later, I could hear a lot of voices around me, but I couldn't feel my body at all. It was like my ears worked, but the rest of me was detached from myself. Her blood pressure is still 60/30. Heart rate still really bradycardic too. She'll need a triple lumen, an arterial line, and a femoral line. I'm not getting any gag reflex. Her oxygen levels are dropping again. She's barely breathing at all. We need to intubate. I wanted to scream out that I was fine, that I could hear them, so I must be fine, that of course I was breathing. I had to be breathing, right? I wanted to tell them not to intubate me because I was still awake. I knew what intubation was from all my experiences with hospitals and medical care. It meant they wanted to put a tube down my throat to put me on life support, to breathe for me. Because according to them, I wasn't breathing much on my own. I tried again to open my eyes, but I was still completely disconnected from my body, and my brain messages to open my eyes weren't going all the way through. My eyes remained glued shut. I tried to open my mouth to talk to all the people that I could hear, talking all around me, but I continued to have the same problem. Someone had severed the connection between my mind and body. I couldn't even feel where my mouth was, let alone open it. I was just starting to get really panicked again when I started falling back down the bumpy rabbit hole of silent darkness. At one point, I became aware of something besides the darkness again. I could feel something in my throat. I couldn't remember where I was, who I was, or what had happened. I was just aware of the sensation of having something lodged in my throat. I tried to reach up and pull whatever it was out of my throat to rid myself of the discomfort, but my hands were stuck. They wouldn't reach up. All of this happened within the context of several seconds. Minutes later, I was plunged back into the numbing darkness. I woke up 4 days after I'd been admitted to the hospital. My mom was sitting by my bed when I opened my eyes, and my whole brain felt foggy and groggy. I had an IV in each arm and an IV line in my chest with several tubes coming out of it. A strange type of IV line in the inside of my thigh. I had a soft board taped to my left wrist. There was some sort of IV line stitched into the inside of my wrist. My chest was covered in sticky pads. And a blood pressure cuff on my arm, on my upper arm. There was an oxygen monitor probe on my left hand's pointer finger, and an oxygen mask pumping air into my mouth and nose. Even with all the equipment I was hooked up to, it still took me a moment to register that I was in the hospital and to remember what had happened. I thought it must have been a few minutes that I'd been there. Hi, Joan. But then my mom explained that I was in the PICU, Pediatric Intensive Care Unit, and I'd been there for a little over 4 days. She told me I'd been on life support that entire time, and I had just started breathing on my own a few hours ago. Her face looked tired when she spoke to me. She explained that she and Dad had took turns being with me the whole time. When my mom told me I'd almost died, I felt a twinge of an unidentifiable emotion. I wasn't sure if it was disappointment that I was still alive, gratitude that my parents had stuck with me, fear that I'd come so close to dying, or relief that I was still alive. Suddenly, I noticed that my clothes were gone and that I was wearing a hospital gown with tigers on it. I remembered that sensation of being naked in the ER, and I asked my mom if the male doctors saw me naked. Most of the male doctors were working near your head, though, my mom reassured me. I'm sure they weren't paying attention to the fact that you are naked. I nodded, but felt so vulnerable and open. The feeling only worsened when a nurse came in to pull out the catheter that was stuck in my privates. I cringed with embarrassment as it came out. My grandparents and Dad came for a visit a few hours after I'd woken up. I was still feeling really weird and a little like I was floating, but we smiled and laughed, and everyone pretended that I hadn't just almost died, that I hadn't just been taken off life support because I had tried to kill myself. I was in the pediatric intensive care unit 2 more days. I started to get used to the nurses and the doctors that came and asked me questions about how I felt a couple times a day. None of the nurses, or even the doctors, ever asked me about the suicide attempt. It was like I was there because my body had just spontaneously shut down, and all the pills I'd taken to make it shut down were forgotten and swept far away. I don't know if they'd given me charcoal through a tube or pumped my stomach to get rid of the effects of the pills, or if they had just treated what the pills had already done. But whatever they had done, the problem was taken care of. And now it was like it had never happened. Part of me was happy that it was never brought up, but part of me was disappointed. I think the disappointed part of me wanted to explain that I had taken the pills because no one believed me about the voices. Maybe I thought that if they saw that it was bad enough for me to want to kill myself and come really close to doing it, then they would understand how the voices not only were there, but were also horribly frightening and intrusive. Then maybe they would finally believe me and help me do something to get rid of them. But no one brought it up. The day I was going to be discharged, a psychiatrist came to speak to me. She was the one who finally brought up the topic of my near-lethal suicide attempt. What you did was very serious, the hospital psychiatrist told me. I just nodded and played with the ribbon on the teddy bear my mom had brought in from home for me. If your mom had brought you in 5 minutes later, you wouldn't be here right now. Do you understand that? I nodded. She didn't seem to understand that my intention had been to not be here right now. We're going to send you home because we're trusting you'll be safe there. Will you be safe there? I shrugged. I didn't really know the answer to that question. When I was hearing voices telling me to do things, my brain got jumbled up and I felt compelled to listen to them and harm myself. When you added to that my desperation and feelings of hopelessness about the rest of my life, well, that brought up the question of whether I really wanted to be safe. Part of me wondered if I'd be better off in the hospital. I wondered if maybe the hospital would believe me if I told them about all the scary voices and visions. I wondered if maybe they could help me. I knew better than to ask to go to the hospital, though. If I asked, then people would assume that the suicide attempt was more of an attempt to manipulate them into putting me back in the hospital. I knew that people loved to say I was manipulative, and they loved to come up with far-fetched explanations for how I was manipulating them. So I just shrugged at the psychiatrist's question. We'll be putting you in the partial hospital program again for a few days, just to make sure you are observed for a short time, and then you should return to your regular schedule. My mom helped me gather my stuff together, and the nurse came and disconnected me from all the equipment. My arms were covered in huge bruises, and I had a big one on the inside of my thigh, where I'd had what they called a femoral line. I liked bruises because usually all my struggles were internal, so that nobody could see them and everyone could ignore them and pretend that they weren't really there. But bruises are obvious and visible. They're like a badge for all your struggles. I had a really satisfying bruise splotched right on my wrist from where they had put a tube they called an arterial line that they used to monitor my blood pressure from the inside of my body and to monitor my oxygen and carbon dioxide levels while the ventilator was breathing for me. I smiled at the bruise as I got dressed and followed my mom out of the intensive care unit. After I left the hospital, my dad took me straight to therapy. I had an appointment with Sandra. I think Sandra might have felt a little bad. She didn't push me too hard in the session. She just asked me what I wanted to talk about. I don't know, I told her. We ended up just staying on light subjects and carefully avoiding the topics of borderline personality disorder, manipulation, my relationship with my parents, my self-harm, and we barely even touched on the suicide attempt for more than a minute. I think Sandra realized that I was in more mental pain than anyone had realized. Oddly, I think that she was one of the few people who realized that my full intent had been to die. Of course, Sandra never admitted this. That wouldn't make her look good. Instead, she treated me with kid gloves, pretending she hadn't been one of the factors in pushing me towards suicide. After therapy, my dad asked me if I wanted to get a new game from the interesting toy store near Sandra's office. I think he felt guilty for not being able to protect me from myself. Like Sandra, my dad never mentioned his guilt aloud, but I knew him well enough. We didn't really need speech to communicate. Besides, he never brought me presents unless he felt like he needed to somehow make up for something. I remembered the caramel frappuccinos from Starbucks that he used to buy me in 7th grade. I pretended I didn't know he felt guilty and just went along and picked out a game. Then, that looked like it would be fun for me. But then instead of just saying thank you, I gave him a long, hard hug. Back at home, the house felt the same as it had felt before I'd come within minutes of dying. I was too weak and tired from everything I'd put my body through to go upstairs to my room. I lay down on the couch instead and breathed in the familiar smells of home. My eyes were just fluttering closed when I heard a knock at the door. Christine and Anne had arrived. My mom had told them that I'd been really sick and in the hospital, and that I was now home. Seeing them pasted an instant smile on my face. I brought out my new game, and we played for a long time. It was hard to talk because my throat was sore, and that my voice was crackly from the breathing tube that had kept me alive for 4 days. But I still managed to laugh and chat with them. It was great feeling like a normal kid for a little while, even if I was sprawled out on the couch the whole time we hung out. because I was too weak to do much else. They said it was no big deal. They were just happy to hang out with me. And it didn't even seem like they were pretending when they said that to me. The whole time I was with them, I forgot the reasons why I tried to kill myself in the first place. I was just having fun with my best friends. In the next few days, things got scarier. The voices that had been less intrusive while I was in the hospital were back stronger than ever. Realities started blurring together, and the partial hospital program didn't seem to be helping the way it once had. Noises seemed amplified again. Colors seemed too bright again, and I couldn't focus on groups anymore, or words coming out of people's mouths. I was sure of what I needed to do. I needed to get myself into an inpatient unit, where maybe they could actually do something to help make the voices quieter, and maybe even calm the weird visions too. I decided that there was only one way to get myself back into the hospital, and that was through pills. In the middle of the night, 3 days after I'd been discharged from the pediatric intensive care unit, I slipped out of my bed, out of my room, and into the darkness. The night was black and shadowy. The cars driving by creeped me out and made silvery snatches of light flit by and cast eerie fears and worries in my mind. I could hear Fellingham breathing heavily in my ear. Even he was scared of the dark, shadowy world that 1:30 a.m. creates in the city. I was halfway to the 24-hour convenience store when I realized I'd forgotten my shoes. I looked down at my bare feet, padding along the cool September pavement, and realized I'd barely felt the ground underneath me. I wondered if somehow I'd been flying instead of walking, and it took me several minutes to remember that people can't fly. But people can't hear voices from other worlds either, Fellingham whispered, interrupting my thoughts and attempts at reaching logic and reasoning. I shivered at that reminder and continued walking through the dead night. I arrived at the convenience store as one big, shaking wreck. My hands refused to stay still. My mind was trying to deal with Fellingham and the chorus whispering, at the same time as I was trying to deal with the racing thoughts in my head. I had seen a dark, hooded figure following me, and I wasn't sure if it was real or not. Either way, it had scared me. Before entering the store, I had pulled my unicorn pajamas bottoms over my bare feet. Somehow, I had managed to gather my thoughts enough to do that. I was still shaking and twitching as I walked into the store and toward the display of over-the-counter pills. I pulled down a package of 30 Benadryl and figured that ought to be enough to get me sick. I glanced around furtively. I could feel 1,000 eyes on me, but there was only one other person in the store. My hand trembled dangerously as I placed the Benadryl on the counter and jammed my hand in the pocket of my sequin purple sweatshirt jacket. My hand was still quivering when I handed the cashier the money. "What are you doing up so late at night?" the cashier demanded. She was a middle-aged Hispanic woman with worried eyes and long dark hair in a tight ponytail. I was starting to worry that I might collapse on the floor right in front of the cashier. I barely heard the cashier's next question, over Fellingham laughing at me and talking about a stolen bike. She repeated herself again. "Where are your parents? Do they know where you are?" I paused as I racked my brain for a good answer. "My dad's in the car. He just sent me in to pick this up for him," I choked out. The cashier had rung up my purchase and was just handing it back. She looked out the window for my dad's car. There were no cars in sight. I just grabbed the window, the Benadryl, and got out of that store as fast as possible. I just wanted to be gone before the woman called the police and reported me as a runaway. That's the end of chapter 18 of When It Was I Ever Normal. The book is actually coming out at the end of May or the first week of June. I'm working on the page proofs right now. They're due on May 5th. I'm finding some technical errors that the page editors made that I have to correct. Oh, thank you, Vivian. I'm so glad you enjoyed it. I'm scheduled for surgery on May 11th. So hopefully that surgery helps me some. In the meantime, this is what I'm dealing with on this. But hopefully I get to go home tomorrow. I'm gonna go home on IV antibiotics and morphine instead of oxycodone, which is controlling my pain better. And we'll see what else we can do. I'm gonna be in palliative care, so hopefully they can manage my pain and nausea better that way. And that's the story. So that's what's up with me, and that's what's up with Cassie. So I think I'm going to end here unless anyone has any other comments. Oh, I'm so glad you enjoyed my stories, Laura. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like it. So glad you guys enjoyed this. Love you all so much. You're great fans. Oh, thanks for praying for my surgery. Yeah, it's on May 11th. I'm probably going to be admitted for it for pain control afterward because I have a lot of soft tissue inflammation from my last surgery, and that was what was causing me all the pain. They were giving me IV Toradol to get rid of some of the, is it autobiographical? So it's semi-autobiographical. Something similar happened to me, yeah, when I was around 11 or 12, yeah. It is. I'm so glad you enjoyed my story, guys. I'm so glad you enjoyed my lives. So glad you were able to join me, Kathy. So glad. Oh, thanks, Vivian. Yeah, this has not been easy at all. I'm a little under the weather, so if I don't see myself, that's why. I'm also on a lot of medication. Thank you so much for watching this. I think I'm gonna end now. But yeah, Cassie's OD is autobiographical. It's something that happened to me when I was 12. I tried telling my therapist, and my therapist told me I was a liar. I'm glad you did subscribe. I'm glad you liked my pages. Check out my author's website at www.beccapava.org. And my blog at www.chronicallyalive.net, and comment on those too. You can also buy chapters of my writing on my website, www.beccapava.org. They're only $2.99 a chapter, and each chapter is like 25 to 30 pages, so it's a really good deal. I really hope that this creates my legacy. Yeah, I really hope it does. All right, guys. Love you all. Gonna end here. Bye.